So I'm talking to Phillipe Walker, who's really, I guess, he has a background in science and molecular biology, but an absolutely wonderful. He's become an absolutely wonderful painter in his lifetime. He lives and works in Montreal, Quebec. I can say, just looking at what I've seen of his work online, he's an incredibly talented craftsman of details and composition in the style of the old masters, really very evocative of their work, but with an obviously modern vocabulary which is far greater than was available to them. For me, just among many other ways of looking at his work, the tension between the religious Christian narrative and eroticism, the essence of eroticism that he explores, is fascinating. It's, in the way I imagine the hypnotic stare of a snake fascinates its prey. I feel like the rabbit. I want to study these surfaces deeply, and I'm somewhat afraid of what I might find in myself as I gaze. I have to say, they take me into territory that seems familiar, but is utterly new, like a sharp-edged dream. They surprise me. I'm surprised by myself in front of them. I just think, I have a kind of a longing, really, to have one of his paintings in my house, because that would force me and my visitors into conversations about the most important subjects of our life and death, and that would utterly destroy any tendency we might have to waste time in small talk. Anyway, that's how I feel, Phillipe, and so with that, I'm wondering if you could
That's very good. Thank you very much. I like those words.
Okay, I'm glad. I'm wondering if you could tell me, how did you get started?
Well, interestingly, as I said, my background is science. I've been I was born and raised in Switzerland, and at some point in my career, I was recruited by a company to build a research site in Montreal to develop new new compounds to fight pain. And it's a very, how should I say, stressful job. It was had a lot of responsibility. I was leading a group of 150 people.
Wow.
And I was fortunate as part of these big companies to be given a personal coach.
Huh?
And in our first discussion with the coach, they do different psychological tests, and they evaluate you from a leadership perspective,
yeah,
in order to, provide on ways to improve yourself.
Yes.
And one of the first remark he made was, Phillipe, you're way too strongly connected to your work perspective. And he suggested that I find a hobby. So, it came as that I took some hobby because I was constantly focusing on work, and he said you need to take some distance. You'll have better ideas if you have other things in mind. And it didn't really come to me, and I forgot about this for a few weeks or months. But one day, a weekend, I was walking on St. Catherine Street in Montreal with my wife, and we passed in front of a shop an art supply shop. There, I saw these canvases and brushes, and I told my wife, I'm going to paint.
Wow.
And she looked at me and she said, you're going to do what? She was in complete disbelief. We went in and I bought a canvas way too big for my lack of skill, and I did something that was ugly, but I loved doing it.
Yeah.
I really loved the painting action.
Yes.
And after a few ugly paintings, I tried to say, well, it's what should I paint, and how can I learn how to paint? And I thought about copying some famous paintings, but I said, this is going to be pretentious and dull. So I said, well, I'm going to take known painting, but I want to add a twist. So it's what I call art hijacking now. I take a famous painting, and by making small or big changes, you can completely change the atmosphere, the meaning, the message, or whatever you want, and that's how I started, actually.
That's just amazing. That's wonderful. And you kept on, and you didn't go to classes, or
no? Well, I started in 2000 around, and for a few years I was completely on my own. I was reading books and looking on internet for some techniques. And one of my younger brother, he's a true artist, and he kind of had fun, watching me starting to paint, and we had some discussions. And when he saw the first attempt that I made to copy some famous painting, he said, "But Philip, at that time they were painting on wood panel. Maybe you should try that."
Yeah.
So at that moment, I started to really dive into the craftsmanship of painting, and I learned how to make wood panel, how to treat linen with rabbit skin glue, more and more, to the point where I'm now making my own pigment. I'm cooking my oil with litharge to prepare what's called black oil, something that was used at the time.
Yes.
And at some point I came across a painter who's now in his 80s. His name is Claude Yvel. He was a famous painter in the 80s. And I went to France to learn how to paint like the masters for a few weeks. And for me, in 2 weeks, I progressed maybe 5 years in terms of craftsmanship.
What was his name again? Hébert?
Claude Yvel, Yvel.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
You should look at him on the internet. He made hyper-realistic paintings in the 80s.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's good to remember people like him.
Yeah, fantastic. He's a great person to know.
Yes.
Know so much about the ancient techniques,
Sure. Well, that's just wonderful. What a great background.